So welcome back, everyone. And it's now my pleasure to welcome Sharif Emil, who is going to be talking to us about relationship-centered education, a global perspective. Sharif is the Saputo Foundation Chair in Pediatric Surgical Education and Patient and Family-Centered Care. And Associate Chair for Education and Departmental Citizenship in Pediatric Surgery. I love that, departmental citizenship, and I hope sometime to hear a little bit more about that. And he's a professor in ped surgery, and pediatrics. I am going to give more time to Sharif and less to his rather lengthy bio. And Sharif, I will ask you if during your presentation you would like to be interrupted, or whether you have spots for interruption, or shall we hold our questions to the end?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for giving me the time. I think we're going to record this presentation as well. You're more than welcome to stop me anytime. I have to actually start with a bit of a disclaimer. The last talk was absolutely amazing, and this is not primarily an academic educational talk. This is really about more of an education experience, and although there are a lot of academic exercises interspersed in this, it really is my chance to share a story with you that I've been very passionate about. And it's really a story about the intersection of my interest in global surgery and global health and education for the last quarter century. So it's really meant to be very informal, and you're more than welcome to stop me anytime if you have questions or comments. Let me share my screen.
So we can ask people either to raise their hand or write a comment in the chat if they want an interruption, and I'll try and keep track of them.
Okay, very good. We always start by confirming that you can see my slides. Thank you. Okay, so, this is an educational institute, and something we hear very often is that medical and surgical education is undergoing a major transformation. I think I hear that, a few times each month, and often right after we hear that, we talk about competence by design and really the revolution that's going on in medical education. But I will submit to you that confidence by design is not the reason that medical education is undergoing a major transformation. And maybe I just spelled out some heresy and half the people will quit the Zoom and I'll be alone. But, when we think about it, how do we teach today versus how we taught when Jeff was my professor in medicine at St. Mary and teaching me at the bedside? I mean, I think that CBD has changed the way we evaluate, the way we promote, the way we measure competence. Yes, absolutely. But I don't think it has really changed the way we teach at the bedside, in the operating room, didactically, case-based, etc. All that has been around. And the reason it hasn't changed that much, it has shown that it's effective. We all became, effective physicians because of the way we learn. So I do think, though, that medical education is, in fact, undergoing a major transformation. But I think the reason it is the digital age and the fact that we are breaking down barriers that have existed for too long and really engaging in an effort to democratize medical education, perhaps like never before. And, this meeting we're having today is probably a bit of a function of the COVID pandemic. Before that, we would have probably met in person 5 years ago. And I think this is, it's changed education locally, but it's also changed education globally and internationally. And that's really the story I'd like to share with you today. So if we just look at a construct of global health, we often talk about need and we talk about access. Those are the two things we talk the most about. But we don't talk so much about safety and effectiveness. I have a PhD student right now who's back in Washington, D.C. completing her residency, and maybe I'll ask her to present at this meeting, looking at something that we don't often talk or think about. What is the quality of the care that is sometimes delivered in low-income countries? Because we often talk about surgery saving lives, but surgery can actually shorten lives if it's actually done poorly or administered in a haphazard or a very low standard way. So the bottom line for all this is education. Education has to do with quality. Education has to do with human resources. Education has to do with workforce. And I would submit that education is really the foundation for anything we want to change in global health. Let me just start by giving you a shocking statistic. This starts to give you an idea of the disparity between North and South. So the number of practicing pediatric surgeons, people in our specialty, in the 5 largest US metropolitan areas, where there's a population of about 3.5 million children, is the same number of practicing surgeons in all of sub-Saharan Africa, which has a population of about 500 million children. So we're talking about 100-fold difference in the workforce. And we know that that disparity translates into mortality. This is a paper we participated in that was just published in Lancet last year, and it shows a number of what we call index pediatric surgical conditions, the type of things that pediatric surgeons really train to be able to deal with, a lot of congenital anomalies. And you can see what happens as the income of countries increase from high income to middle income to low income. So these conditions are really harbingers of what the healthcare system are like. They're like really sentinel conditions that we can look at and describe the gulf that exists between low and high income countries. And the same thing exists in workforce. We've done a study with Dan Pinaro looking at workforce density and how it translates to mortality. And again, you can see in the upper graph here what workforce is like in terms of pediatric surgeons for 1 million children in high income, middle income, and low income. And again, you can see for some of the conditions that are really index neonatal conditions, and when you save a baby, when you save a child, you don't save a life, you save a lifetime. So these are lifetimes that are being wasted because of the lack of these facilities. Now, it's very easy to talk about numbers, and the numbers can be overwhelming. But for me, as somebody who spends several weeks each year in those settings, I'm just going to share a very short video with you, a couple of minutes, to give you an idea of what that translates like into when we're looking at an actual human life. I'm just going to increase my volume a bit. Sorry.
C'était pas facile quand j'ai accouché. Elles ont fait ces années parce que tantôt, en tout cas, ce dernier échographie que j'ai fait, on a vu que c'est sa tête. C'est quand on m'a opéré, on a vu que c'était pas la tête.
Teratoma is the Greek word for monster. And when you see these tumors, you totally understand why they're called that. They're massive.
J'ai assisté à la naissance de ma mère. On a opéré ma petite sœur, on m'a présenté l'enfant. J'ai vu que l'enfant, les médecins eux-mêmes ne savaient pas quoi faire.
The irony of these tumors is that the overwhelming majority, over 90%, are benign. They're not cancer, they're not malignant tumors. But when not treated, they do become malignant and they do kill the child.
Moi, quand je restais, je réfléchissais comment l'enfant devait marcher, comment l'enfant devait faire.
Now imagine seeing your child every day with this awful large tumor that's growing with them and not be able to do anything with them. That's a level of pain I still cannot comprehend.
Tout le monde ne peut pas. Mais on ne pouvait pas pleurer là où on ne pouvait pas. On fallait qu'on la console, on la console seulement. On ne pouvait pas pleurer là où elle était. Ça, c'est quelque chose qui me touche à
Never an easy surgery, so all-day procedure. Goes through 8 or 9 hours. But he did well.
Quand le docteur sortit de la salle d'opération, Préliminaire, ça s'est bien passé. Nous sommes venus nous prendre, nous sommes partis voir l'enfant, et toucher l'enfant. Et c'est bon, ça va. Je rencontre vraiment à tous les docteurs, tous les médecins qui m'ont soutenu pendant l'opération. Parce qu'eux-mêmes voyaient comment moi je faisais. Vous avez pitié, et me consolaient, non, avant, ça va aller.
Patients never stepped out of a small village or a small town in Cameroon. Coming to a ship full of strangers, hearing different languages spoken. Yes, it's an intimidating experience, but they come because they have hope and they see the love that is really love in action, not just spoken about.
Quand lui va vendre, on va venir et Dieu aussi merci en tout ce qu'il a fait pour moi.
Lui disait encore merci parce que le Seigneur ne nous a pas abandonnés. Le Seigneur s'est souvenu de nous.
This is Emmanuel's story, and there are thousands of children like this. Now, if you think about why a surgery like this was not done for Emmanuel, it's not what we think about. It's not material resources. In fact, there's really no significant equipment used. This is not a procedure that needs an ICU stay. It's simply education. It's lack of enough people educated to be able to take care of these children. And we did another study on pediatric surgical capacity, and you can see the numbers of pediatric surgeons in many countries in Africa gets really close to zero. Many of the countries I spend time in have just obtained their first pediatric surgeons in the last few years. Now, here's what's really interesting. When we ask surgeons in these very low resource settings what they need, you would think they're talking about resources and money and equipment, but actually not. 4 out of their 5 top needs have to do with education. Collaborations for faculty professional development, scholarships, collaborations for trainee education, and opportunities for overseas clinical training and research initiatives. These are the things they're actually asking for the most because they realize that that is where most of the deficit actually lies. So is this some type of a one-way street where some of us invest in this, whether education or service? Actually not. There's a lot in it for us, and this has really been my passion to spread the message that this is a win-win. If we just look at the interest of trainees, more than 30% of graduating medical students had international education experience. They have done rotations overseas. In our field, 2/3 of the applicants to surgical residencies would be more interested in a program that has some type of international training. And we know, of course, that most medical schools in North America have now established global health programs. And obviously, we know McGill has a very, very prominent and superb global health program. And surgical residents in particular are very interested because of the desire to really engage globally. So 82% of applicants have an interest in global surgery. About 2/3 prefer to have international electives in their curriculum. And 76%, 3/4, plan to incorporate some global surgery into their careers. And this is a nice study that really looked in detail at what are the benefits. Like, why do we have to look at this in a serious manner? Because it is important to know how to function with limited resources. And there is a lot of reverse innovation. When we go to sub-Saharan Africa and come back, we actually learn how to use our resources here better. And we all know that we also have limited resources in our own communities. Wide variety of surgical pathology that we do not see here. And then being able to work outside your comfort zone, adapt to a foreign culture and a foreign practice and understand what the issues are. But probably the most important is this last point of forming relationships with local counterparts. It's really about investing for the long term. There is also a clinical need. This is a study that looked at critical care and trauma practice and surveyed 47 program directors from the US and Canada. And many of these fellowships were reasonably low volume operative exposures. So international rotations were helped to supplement the exposure. But what was important is that 90% of program directors wanted to make this an exchange, so that they wanted to host also fellows and trainees from low-income countries in return for sending their trainees to that, so that, again, it's really a mutual benefit. And our organizations here, our academic organization, Society for University Surgeons, and the academic surgical societies have really now endorsed the whole idea of global surgery as a defined academic surgical specialty. No different than colorectal surgery or pediatric surgery or any of the other specialties that we do. Most academic surgical departments recognize the value of academic global surgery. Again, McGill has a very active and very vibrant global surgery program, both in adult and pediatric. And really, there is a push now for academic departments to provide support for academic global surgeons. The overwhelming majority of us who still do this, do it as complete volunteers. We forego our income, we forego our support when we leave, and we're really trying to change this. And there's actually a textbook that has just been published on academic global surgery as a field on its own. I'm very honored to hold the Haile Debas Prize here at McGill, and Dr. Debas has really been one of my heroes. And he's seen the field from both sides. Came from Eritrea, trained in Canada, practiced in the US, rose to the very upper echelons of surgery in North America, and yet he really still emphasized the importance of not living in the ivory tower and really helping from an early point trainees to get exposure to what things are like in the rest of the world. And in our own field, there's a very strong interest. About half of pediatric surgeons have done some international work. Almost all are interested in engaging. And really, a lot of them are interested. It's not about just going and operating, it's the teaching component and the capacity building. So with all this context, when I came here in November 2008, one of the first things I wanted to create is an exchange or an international rotation for a fellow. I had been in Kenya many times, working in several settings there. And one of the hospitals that really impressed me is this hospital in the Rift Valley called Kijabi. It's the hospital where Dan Pinero actually was a missionary surgeon for almost a decade, created the first pediatric surgery training program in East Africa. I had been there, I had operated with Dan, I visited Kenya many times, and I really thought our fellow would have a unique experience if they had an international rotation over there. So we created this fellowship, this international rotation, and the objectives were, as you see here, we wanted to expose our fellows to surgical pathologies that would be absent in our own environment. We wanted to have them experience patient care in a low resource setting. We wanted them to appreciate the challenges that confront pediatric surgeons in those settings, understand what are the pertinent global health issues that apply to pediatric surgery, and really see, and this is one of the things that impressed me the most in Kijabi, just because we're in a low resource setting doesn't mean we cannot provide whole person care. In fact, they really excelled in doing that. And then show that academic pediatric surgery can still be practiced in a low resource setting. And Dan really did an amazing amount of work, essentially creating an academic pediatric surgical training program in a very low income setting. So we created the infrastructure and we had it approved by the Royal College during our accreditation. We made sure that this is not a surgical adventure. It was not to send our fellow there to do some cases that they're never going to get follow up on and come. So they had involvement in the entire spectrum from pre-operative to operative to post-operative. There was a very clear evaluation process. We made sure that there is a American board certified or Royal College certified surgeon supervising them. And where there were security concerns, we would either keep the fellow back. It was an elective, so not every fellow had to go. And Rob Baird here was our first fellow to go. And when Rob came back, your trainees will always give you the very best ideas. When Rob came back, right away, he said, we need to make this an exchange. And within a few months, we created the exchange and we hosted Dr. Frihun Ayali, who was a surgical trainee at Kijabi from Ethiopia at the time. And actually, we had a family who was very grateful for the care they received, and they helped fund Frihun's trip by hosting him and covering some of the expenses. So after 5 years of doing this, we evaluated our program. This is after 5 of our fellows had gone and 5 of their fellows had come. And the first thing we noticed is that the experience was very different. It was really complementary. Pediatric surgeons in Africa trained to also be pediatric neurosurgeons and pediatric urologists and pediatric orthopedic surgeons, because these subspecialties are still in their infancy. And here we really concentrate on pediatric general and thoracic surgery. So they were very, very complementary experiences. The teaching goals, the educational objectives, were highly achieved by both our fellows and their fellows. And we also found that there was a significant burden from housing, travel for the African fellows. Sometimes coming here in the winter was very difficult, some issues with visas and so on. And you can see that the burden was higher for the fellows coming from Africa than for our fellows who were going to Africa. So this actually prompted us to significantly revise our program, and we started to find a way to actually have the fellow become have clinical privileges so that they can see patients and not just be an observer. And we were able to do that after the second fellow. And then we tried to really make it complementary so that our fellow goes at the same time their fellow comes. And we have an exchange so that the volume is spread out and we don't have, people just here essentially watching. We were able to get it funded and endowed by another very grateful family. We made sure the fellow, when they come from Africa, they also experience the academic environment in North America by going to the American Pediatric Surgical Association or the Canadian Association of Pediatric Surgical meeting, not to just attend the meeting, but to really network and start to develop relationships with people who are interested also in continuing to collaborate with them. And this is just one of the fellows who participated, and this is Edmund. I had gone to Rwanda while this program was going on, and Dr. Laberge and I were involved with helping create the pediatric surgery infrastructure there at the university. And this is Edmund, and he was actually extricating me from a scrub that I got incarcerated into because all the scrubs are very small. Everybody's very small, and I put on the scrub and I couldn't get out of it. So he was using a pair of scissors to cut it and get me out of it. Really saved my life. And Edmund was amazing. I was sending these dispatches from Rwanda about what I was seeing, what I was experiencing to share it. And my second one was about him. He was a young, bright African surgeon who really wanted to serve his country. He was not interested in getting education so that he could leave for, a better quality of life, or he really wanted to be there, and he was hungry for education. So every time we would go to Rwanda, we would work with him, we would mentor him, and then he ended up going to a program in Kijabi. This is me operating with him in Rwanda. And this is what I mean by, relationship-centered education. I'll just show you a real example of how this doesn't just make a difference to the person who receives the education, but to the patients who will then benefit from it. So this is Edmund in Rwanda with Robin Petrozzi, who was a University of Virginia resident spending 2 years there as part of a master's program. And we were just operating on a baby, and then Edmund came in the exchange program from Kijabi many years back. This was my little daughter at the time. It was apple picking season. Through the exchange, then Robin went back to work in Kijabi to do her international rotation while Edmund was the fellow, and they really formed an amazing bond. Robin finished and negotiated a job at the University of Florida. 3 months a year, she would go to Kijabi. And it was, again, to build capacity, to help Edmund, who now became the very first pediatric surgeon in Rwanda. 12 million people did not have a single pediatric surgeon. And Robin really became his partner. We continue to help them, but the amazing thing is what difference it has made to patients. This is another one of my dispatches on a baby with a condition called gastroschisis, where the baby is born with all the bowel essentially herniated. In Canada, survival is 98, 99%. In Rwanda, I was there in 2013, not a single baby had survived. Survival was 0. And through Robin's work and continued collaboration and capacity building, she just published this paper with Edmund. They've improved the survival from 0 to 25%. And that may not seem like a lot, but that's a lot of babies who are not surviving and are now having a normal life. Because once you survive this condition, you essentially have a normal life ahead of you. There really are no significant morbidities. So this really makes a difference. Now, here's the problem, is that we were an outlier. Nobody else wanted to establish a similar program because they were worried that the American Board of Surgery will pull their accreditation. Of course, we're accredited by the Royal College and we have reciprocal accreditation. So that's how we were protected. But we made a huge push to really rethink this, because I felt that it was very discriminatory and there were a lot of arguments that really were being put through by people who did not grasp what these type of programs do. And so we published this paper saying, let our fellows go. And we really challenged the American Board of Surgery and the ACGME to look at what their policy is doing. And we addressed all their concerns. One of their concerns is that pediatric surgical training was too short. Well, we were just asking for 1 month out of 24 months to go. We weren't asking, for the fellow to spend half their time there. And then this was the biggest one, that this is a poorly supervised surgical adventure. And again, we weren't saying just send the fellow to operate by themselves or, do a bunch of cases and come back, but have a well-supervised experience. It said they will not receive adequate follow-up. Well, if you think about it, we operate on babies and then we do 2 years of training and we move. So unless every fellow stays in the institution where they trained, by definition, you don't really get adequate follow-up on most of the patients they operated on as a pediatric surgery fellow. And then they said, well, programs that are low volume will use these to boost their numbers. And we said, fine, don't count the volume. Then don't count the numbers they do in Africa. Just count the numbers they do at their programs. And this was the biggest one. They said, well, people can wait until they finish training and then they can go. But our fellows were actually asking to go. And actually the response to our editorial was absolutely overwhelming. Fellows from all over North America and young surgeons started writing the Journal of Pediatric Surgery and saying, we want to go. We need this to be accredited. So as you know, things don't change quickly. It took about 5 years, but we didn't relent. In every meeting, we argued. In every forum, we argued. And about a year ago, finally, after years of advocating for this, the American Board of Surgery and the ACGME allowed incorporation of up to 4 weeks of an international elective. And this was really one of the true triumphs of our advocacy for this. I'm going to just speak about a few other programs we're doing to enhance this idea of relationship-centered care on a global sense. Dr. Laberge, the immediate past chief of pediatric surgery here before me, and really my mentor, had also been very engaged in global surgery. And we created this program called the Jean-Martin Laberge Fellowship in Global Pediatric Surgery, again, through the support of a family of this little girl whose life he saved. We were able to endow it, and actually we have not endowed it yet. We were able to create a seed fund, but we're trying to endow it now. And the idea was to create a research fellowship with some clinical experience for really surgeons who want to invest in increasing global capacity in low-income settings. We started out by taking American and Canadian trainees, and then we shifted to taking trainees from LMICs. And our first 2 trainees coming from LMICs with Dr. Luc Malemo from the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Dr. Butella from Brazil. Fabio just went back, and I think Farhan is aware of this, and did the first TRIC trauma resuscitation in kids Royal College course outside North America, the first pediatric trauma course in Brazil, and it was sold out, highly successful. And this is what we see in doing practical things that are really going to change the outcomes for children. We've also collaborated with his group to look at this issue of gastroschisis again, and over several years helped them look at their data and analyze their data and decide how best to improve the outcomes of the disease. And their survival has gone from what was more typical of low-income countries in the 20 range to now close to 75%, coming very, very close to our survival here in North America. So these are the relationships that then give rise to collaborations, again, that really make a difference to patients. Another program are the visiting programs. I mean, you probably have all of those in your organizations of inviting, in our case, surgeons from low and middle income countries. This was the oldest such program by the Pacific Association of Pediatric Surgeons, named after Jim Warden, who was actually a Canadian pediatric surgeon who practiced in California for most of his career. And these programs, have sometimes been criticized because it's a lot of support to have somebody come attend the meeting. But it's a lot more than that. This is a similar program looked at by the Pediatric Orthopedic Society. And you can see that this is really a relationship building program. Most of the fellows who visited continued to consult members on care-related issues, really became a community of a learning community. Half of them organized and hosted a positive member to come, and 13% became members themselves. And a tremendous amount of knowledge sharing takes place through these programs. In our society, the Canadian Association of Pediatric Surgeons, we also have such a program, and we actually hosted some of the fellows a couple of years ago. And the theme that came through, again, it wasn't about coming to attend a meeting or see some presentation. It was about the relationships that continue to bear fruit long after the program is over. And this is actually very emotional for me. This is Dr. Dunya Mogul. She's actually about to join us here at McGill in the next couple of weeks. Some of these programs can save lives. Dunya was a surgeon, a female pediatric surgeon in Afghanistan. I sponsored her and she came to the PAPS meeting back in 2018, and we continued to keep in touch with her and to see how we can support her. When the Taliban take over, you can imagine what happened to her or what would have happened. She had to escape and hide from one house to another and from one basement to another. And actually PAPS found a way to get her out. And we got her out of Afghanistan, and she is now here in Canada. She was accepted as a refugee, and she will be joining us as the next Jean-Martin Laberge Fellow in Pediatric Surgery in just 2 weeks. And that is really the power of relationship building. So I'll shift gears a bit. I talked about this late last time, so I'm going to be very brief about it. In 2013, I really had this sort of inspiration to write a book, but there's a lot of textbooks out there in pediatric surgery, and I wanted to know what is it going to add. And so I really decided to make it a case-based textbook and just a very different approach to our field. We know that learners like case-based surgical education. This is something that has been shown over and over. And I really wanted to write, not to edit, but to write something that it talks about the practice. And what do I mean by that? Well, I wanted to write something that really talks about things that you often cannot read in a textbook. Things like good judgment, decision-making, that we don't see really in textbooks or even most of the educational resources. And again, just very briefly, the format of the book is a case-based approach. So it starts right away from the first word with case presentation, and then goes into many things that textbooks do not talk about. How do you communicate with other people in a multidisciplinary fashion? How do you communicate with other professionals? What advice do you give? What do you contribute in a multidisciplinary meeting? How do you talk to families? How do you relate decisions to families? I mean, these are the things that we don't often see. And then we look at the images and again, continue with just as a case would develop in a real practice. How would you explain to parents that you still are recommending resection when the child has no symptoms, etc., showing the surgical findings, showing the pathology. And then, of course, you cannot capture an entire condition in one case. So we present multiple other cases through each chapter and so on, and even videos that show surgical procedures and all that. So this took about 4 years to create, because I wrote the book, I didn't edit it, and it was really a bit of a miracle in my professional career that it came about. But throughout the time I was doing it, I was really obsessed with the idea of how am I going to diffuse this? Because, yes, it's on Amazon, but I knew that not a single surgeon in a low-income country is going to buy this book. And there's like pirated copies that can be obtained and so on. But of course, we're trying to discourage that kind of behavior because it's not really professional. And here's, what I came to recognize through the years is that this massive information deficit exists. Surgeons and trainees cannot afford to buy surgical textbooks, so you resort to pirate copies. Online journal access is still not that common in many of the countries I go to. And so there's this global comprehensive information deficit. This is my dad, who was an orthopedic surgeon who practiced in Egypt and Nigeria for most of his career before moving to the US. And my dad had to spend about 2 months out of his income to just subscribe to a Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery. And that was a sacrifice he made because he really wanted to stay in touch with the field. So there were 2 projects, and this is what I will end with, of how I thought I could take the material and really globalize it and get more people involved. And one was about CBCLIPS. I talked about CBCLIPS last time, so I'm not going to go about it in detail, but it was an online interactive efficient way of teaching. This is the last episode that was just posted last month. So, just a very brief summary. 6-week-old boy born at 28 weeks gestation, persistent chest X-ray abnormalities, respiratory status improved, allowing him to wean off CPAP, but still has multiple kidney and his exam normal. What do you do? And then I just posted Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, leave it there for 10 days. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of people will look at it, interact with it, etc. And then we provide the commentary. And I'll just show you an example for those of you who may not have attended last time. It's 2 minutes.
Then to an ex-premature baby boy who continues to improve from a respiratory standpoint, but still has abnormalities on the chest X-ray. Let's look at the chest X-ray. We see a large thymus with some tracheal deviation to the right. That's not unusual at all in a baby of this age, especially with a premature, but we often see bilateral focal diaphragmatic elevations. I call them elevations because diaphragmatic anomalies are a spectrum, from focal infiltrations to complete infiltrations to hernias to the sac to diaphragmatic hernias. And the question is, we need to image further. And the critical principle I would like to cover with you is that cross-sectional imaging for congenital infiltrations typically does not add much at all beyond the chest X-ray. Here is an example of another patient with a focal left-sided infiltration, and you can see all the MRI showed is that the spleen is sitting under the infiltration, but really does not add anything to the image. Should we do fluoroscopy? Fluoroscopy is very useful for acquired infiltrations, but again, does not usually add anything for congenital infiltrations or focal infiltrations, because almost all these diaphragms will in fact move under fluoroscopy. So how should we manage this patient? And this is really the most important critical principle. The patient should be managed by trajectory of findings and by symptoms. Patient remains asymptomatic. Typically, many of these infiltrations will in fact improve. You can see in this patient whom I followed for 12 years that the diaphragm almost completely normalized by the time the child was 12 and was improving steadily along the way. When application is needed, I would recommend a thoracoscopic application, and you can see an example of a thoracoscopic application in this video. The last and final clinical principle is to remind you that gastric fixation anomalies can be associated with diaphragmatic infiltration, as you can see here in a gastric volvulus associated with infiltration. So when we have a patient with GI symptoms of infiltration, that is very low threshold for working that patient up. Thank you, and until the next CD.
So 2 minutes, 20 seconds, and trainees can watch it while they're walking to the OR or in between patients, and very efficient. And here's what has been really exciting for me personally. This is just taken a few months ago in Ecuador at the PAPS meeting. We had 2 surgeons from Indonesia, and I have really worked to try to get the surgeons from low-income countries not to just be users of knowledge, but providers of knowledge, and really try to empower them and get them to be the presenters. And this was actually very exciting. Dr. Emiliana Lia is a surgeon from Indonesia, and this was her presentation.
Welcome to another CBCLIPS. My name is Emiliana Lia from Bandung, Indonesia, and I'm very proud to be the first LMIC presenter of CBCLIPS.
And this is now really what I am trying to do, is to incorporate surgeons from low-income countries as teachers, not just learners. The second issue related to the book was really a compliment to the Mirella and Lino Saputo Foundation that funds my chair. And they really invested in my dream of trying to get the book out. And so we created copies that were subsidized. And after the first distribution, Dr. Levitt, who is a very prominent pediatric colorectal surgeon in Washington, D.C., joined me. He has 3 small books in his specific area. And we created a library of books that we started sending to institutions, not to people, but to institutions that are involved in teaching and learning and providing care. And these were the criteria. We had a gifting program, and you had to be in an LMIC classified by the World Bank, be practicing in a training setting, be a public or university hospital, at least be 75% in non-private practice, and there would be 1 copy per institution. And that distribution program that just ended has really been amazing for Mark and I. We've been able to reach 80 countries, 270 institutions, thousands of trainees, very diverse group of countries that you see here. But again, it wasn't the distribution and just sending books. It was the community of learners that it has actually created. And the relationships it has created have been amazing. We have weekly educational meetings, and now we have surgeons from Uzbekistan and the Philippines who join us because they're online. And we just had a surgeon from Brazil start to join us yesterday. And this idea of all learning together, like, why not? If we're able to now do things online, why do we have to restrict it to our hospital borders or even our province or or country borders. And it's really an idea of looking at everything we do in a global way. We will just start broadcasting our SRP once a month through a platform called the Hendren Project, where we're really going to have hundreds, possibly over 1,000 people join us. New teaching opportunities of integrating people into our teaching and integrating ourselves into their teaching in different parts of the world. I was just again in Ecuador, and this is a group of residents who had received the books. And once they received the books, we continue to be in touch. We talk about cases, we talk about challenges, we even provide some career coaching if we can. And this is being back in Ecuador, and it's really amazing when you establish these long distance relationships and then actually be on the ground and you feel like you've always been with these people for a lifetime. It's truly incredible. The Hendren Project is another format I work through. It's named after one of the giants in pediatric surgery. And this is a web-based format. And again, in what I've tried to do, I've always tried to get surgeons who are either practicing in low-income countries, like Dr. Wright, who's from London, but works mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, or surgeons from the country themselves, actually, again, being faculty, so that we really try to democratize not just the use of knowledge, but the provision of knowledge. I don't know how much more time I have. I have about 5 minutes to finish my talk, but I can stop here if you would like.
Yeah, I think you've got the 5 minutes, and that'll leave around 8 for questions.
Okay, so I'm just this is the last part, which is my engagement with Mercy Ships, because it's very relevant to education. So I'm just gonna introduce the organizations with a short video.
Almost 40 years ago, I took my first trip from Lausanne, Switzerland by train to Italy to look at ships. I listed some of the things that I didn't know or that I'd heard. Things like, you can't do that. It's way too expensive. I didn't know where we would find a crew. In fact, I didn't know what I didn't know. I was 32. That's awfully young. Almost 40 years ago, God took a huge risk. I could say that it all started with a hurricane or reading a book about the famous SS Hope. I could say it started with meeting Mother Teresa or with the birth of our special needs son, John Paul. Or I could say it began with my parents' simple way with grace and mercy and dignity with their small town helping hands. I could say all of those things about the very beginning of the idea that became Mercy Ships, and they'd all be true.
Mercy Ships is a unique organization because it is bringing services to countries that would otherwise never be able to access this.
The millions of people who either physically or financially do not have access to healthcare are staggering.
You just see people that need help. You realize that they have no way of getting help. And I want them to know that they're loved.
After the rejection and ridicule, hard lives that they've had up until this point, and to have a worth of nurses and the other ship staff, people just pour out so much love, and then love does make a difference.
People say to me, well, there's all these millions. How do you think you can change that? And we can change the individuals one life at a time.
Bringing this hospital ship in, it's a state-of-the-art platform. Surgeons, nurses, professionals from all over the world bring this free of charge at the highest standards is unique.
If you talk to any of the government leaders, as I have, they will tell you how beneficial Mercy Ships has been, not only for their people, but also in terms of a lasting impact.
We're working hard here to leave a legacy of improved healthcare.
Mercy Ships is particularly good at providing not just training, but training with an imbued sense of needing to pass on the training.
We can work together and do things together that we can never do by ourselves.
So this is the organization, and I've really been privileged to be part of it for the last 6 years. I'm currently the pediatric surgery specialty consultant. And the best part of it is that it's about mutual mentoring. We always work with African surgeons. This is George Knock, another Kijabi exchange fellow who came and spent time with us. And now I was back in Cameroon working with him there. Really a privilege to be able to see full circle our trainees in practice in Africa and now working with us. Dr. Alois Sagna came and spent 6 months with us from Senegal. I've been back now twice to work with him there. And then not just work with him on the ship, but also work with him on in his own hospital and really see the effect of these relationships bear fruit. We were just back there in 2020. Again, Dr. Botello, our global surgery fellow, came with me, and one of Dr. Sagna's fellows came, and it was just an amazing example of how these relationships continued. And it's very much about trainees also. And this has really been one of the hallmarks is I've always taken trainees with me. And this is one of the Royal College blogs we did. And I'm just going to read it to you very quickly. I said, many trainees come to the Africa Mercy with their attending staff. The experience cannot be duplicated. In our training environment, they'll see late presentations. They'll understand the effect of poverty, abject poverty on health and life. They'll learn to manage fragile patients. They'll have to make difficult decisions. They'll have to function well outside their comfort zone. But most importantly, they will see altruism not just lectured and spoken about, but lived every moment of every day. They will experience the healing power of common purpose and common vision, not just to patients, but also to us who take care of them. And I can tell you that the fellows and residents who have come with me have had really life-changing experiences. So 20 years ago, I was in Africa, fresh out of training, and I was speaking at Kenyatta Hospital. And my host put Professor Sharif Emil and said, hey, wait a second. I'm not a professor. I'm not even an assistant professor. I'm just a lecturer. I just finished my training. And he said, if I don't put professor, nobody will listen to you. And it's very, very hierarchical. So here we are 20 years really trying to break this hierarchy and truly moving to a model of all learning together. So thank you so much. And if there are any comments, I'm happy to take.
So we do have a little bit of time. Thanks so much. If you want to take down your slides, that would be helpful. And I've got to say, your enthusiasm is infectious. You know, I keep thinking, I guess maybe it's a little bit too late to go down and start retraining as a pediatric surgeon, but it kind of makes me want to. You made a comment about you not giving an academic presentation, but I would beg to differ on that. I think this was a very scholarly approach. And in fact, this is outcomes-based research. You're not just looking at whether people, the learners are doing something different, but you're looking at whether they're being true health outcomes and learning, more distal learning outcomes based on an education innovation. So hats off for that. I see 3 questions and we have probably 5 minutes. So I'll ask you to please keep the questions or comments and responses brief. We go Jeff, Farhan, and Beth. You need to unmute, Jeff.
Sharif, thank you for a wonderful presentation. You're always really good at putting your finger right on the boo-boo. And you know what struck me in the presentation? You made a comment, relationship-based medical education. And this is an exemplar of exactly what you've said. And one of the things that made me reflect on is competency-based medical education, relationship-based education. We need both. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. It's a great point.
Yeah, Jeff, of course he puts his finger on the bobo. He's a surgeon. He's got to just stop that bleed. Sharif, congratulations. It really is amazing work that you've done, that you've done with your colleagues. Watching it for 20 years, I know of it and I see it all the time. So congrats. I think that's phenomenal and truly inspiring. Great stuff, Sharif. I think from my standpoint, one comment, I think the beauty in what you did is the engagement, and then the engagement of people in scholarship. If you read the papers that were written, Fabio was the first author. Others were doing it. It was not you going down there and doing it for them. It was you promoting them to become part of the conversation and then have legitimacy and then push the bar in a different way. And you didn't mention that, but I want to give you credit for that because I think that was brilliant to get them as part of the community. The thing that I wanted to bring up for discussion with this group, and perhaps you're a great person to lead this. Early in my career, I was involved in clinical activities like this, where I would go and teach for a couple of weeks and teach around cardiac critical care in middle-income countries and help with that. Over time, I've realized that, okay, maybe like Linda, maybe that clinical isn't where I belong. So the last little while, for probably about the last 7 years, I've been working with humanitarian type work in low middle income countries around education. And I wonder that with the brain power of this IHSE and with the ability to do things remotely like you've done, whether we can't help in different ways. And concretely, I've gone to the West Africa College of Surgeons and taught about building curricula, building assessment, building exams. And there's so many more experienced people in this room around that type of work that I wonder that we as McGill can't leverage some of your energy. The one challenge will be pediatric surgery is sexy. So you can get funding more easily than we can.
Thank you. I'm actually going to, thanks for the comment. I will try and fit in 2 people if we can keep responses short. Sharif, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to be very, very short, Farhan. I think you've really struck a very important chord because, I was reviewing the IDAC proposal for the Royal College, and I was really, really encouraged to see that most of the proposals was really about instituting educational projects through Canadian partners. So yes, it is very, very doable. And if you look at what's happening in Africa, things are changing very dramatically. People are really looking for an academic structure. So partnering with an organization like the IHSC, without going into too much detail right now, I think it's an amazing opportunity.
Thank you. Beth?
Thanks so much, Sharif. Recently, I've heard quite a bit about the idea of the global north and the global south in healthcare and also in education, and a bit of pushback that the global north knows what the global south needs in terms of education. And I was just thinking that might be an interesting idea for you to explore and a next step and possibly publish on also.
Yeah, I'll give a very short response, but I think that's another very excellent point. Dr. Mark Schreim, who is the International Chief Medical Officer for Mercy Ships, actually just wrote a beautiful article, and he calls it the false dichotomy of fishing. That we always talk about, don't give somebody a fish, but teach them to fish. Well, we have to do both at the same time. We really do, because people are losing their lives. So we have to provide the care, but as we do that, we have to always link it to teaching and making sure that the people we mentor and work with and partner with are able to do that after we're gone. And so it's really not one or the other, but it's bringing the global north and global south together, helping provide the resources and the care, but also instituting the teaching and the resource and the capacity building that will last after we're done with the services.
Great, thank you. Rob, your hand went up and down. Do you still have a comment?
Sure, I put it in the chat because I thought we were running short on time. But
okay.
Thanks, Sharif, that was really great. I was just wanted to sort of highlight and ask whether there had been any thought of trying to move academic global surgery into the realm of something that's actually recognized as a formal training pathway, like an area focused competence, for example, at the college, and whether that might be a way to get the kind of recognition, support that you started with in your presentation, talking about it so badly needed for people who work in this area.
Thanks.
Yeah,
That's a great idea. I am going to give you 1 minute to tie up, Sharif, and then I have a couple of announcements.
Yeah, so Rob, it's still really a program in its infancy. Our fellowship here, the Jean-Martin Laberge Fellowship, is the very first fellowship dedicated to that. There are some groups in the US who are creating international fellowships for people who want to go and try to establish capacity building programs and train them on how to do that. But it's still a bit of a struggle to really get the legitimacy of global pediatric surgery as really kind of an independent discipline, if you will. One last thing I'll say, we're inviting a surgeon for our annual visiting professorship in June. And we typically, invite somebody who's a prominent surgeon in the US or Canada. But this year, we're inviting a Nigerian surgeon. And we did that on purpose because we want to show that when we talk about global surgery, we don't need experts from the US and Canada to come and speak about it. We can actually get somebody in the field who's living it day and night, who's having to deal with the struggles to actually come in and speak to us. And I'm very excited about that. And I'll share those links with you when the time comes. It's going to be in June.
Thank you. This is all very inspiring. And applause for the presentation. Thanks very much. A couple of reminders about next week's meeting.